recording, and after all the one we're broadcasting live at the moment. So this is the Praying Carer channel, and I am your host as usual, just in case I have other people who are just joining us for the first time today on the Praying Carer channel. My name is Olufunke Adeluye, and I have with me Ros Dakin. I will try not to say so much because I'm reading the profile you sent to me. I said, oh no, really? I have a celebrating. So I will just say a quick word about the Praying Carer channel. It was established in 2021, and we dedicated it to parent carers. Okay, so when I have my viewers on, or when I have my guests on, I try to steer us away from the children as much as possible and bring the discussions and conversations to us as parent carers. So the issues that are affecting us directly as parent carers, ask me how many times we succeed in doing that. Most of the time you see us still drifting straight onto the children, and then you bring it to and say, no, I want us to talk about you as a as a carer, as a parent carer. You know, so we succeed at times, we don't at times, but it is what it is. It is our world, isn't it? Most of the time, we see the need to talk about the children, you know, as part of our identity in terms of what we do, you know. So we'll see how far we go today. So thank you very much, Ros, for coming. It's our Carer's Week, and we want to be part of that celebration. We want to be part of just raising awareness, you know, about unpaid carers, about parent carers, what we do, what affects us, the issues, the different things, and we learn, you know, as we go on. Generally, I would be almost saying that I will qualify as a young carer, where you are when I'm sitting next to you at the moment. But you know, I mean, I'm really, really excited about this and can't wait to hear what you want to say to us today. I'm really hoping we will learn a lot from your experience as an older, you know, parent carer. So this theme, like we discussed earlier on, this theme for this week is recognizing and supporting carers in the community. Recognizing and supporting carers in the community. And I know there's a lot in there, right? But focus for today is on the health and social care and how that's impacting the life of a carer. So those are the kind of, you know, things that we'll be discussing. But before we go straight into that, tell us about you, Ros. How have your journey and experience as a parent carer, how has it been?
Well, I have three daughters of my own, and the oldest one is autistic, and that, of course, as you probably know, is not a disability. It's just a different way of experiencing the world. But as she has grown up and gone out into the world of work and so on, the way that society, and in particular her employer, does not make the necessary adjustments for her differences has just brought her to a place of such complete burnout that she's actually classed as disabled now. So although I never looked on her as a disabled child when I was raising her, she certainly does count as disabled at the moment. And then her younger, her middle sister, because I have three, so her middle sister was born 13 weeks prematurely, and as a result of that, she became disabled with cerebral palsy and a learning disability and partial sight, and she's also autistic as well. So my experience was of raising three children, of whom two were quite complicated. One of them was very complicated and difficult. And then my husband died 10 years ago now, and we had some friends at our church who also had a disabled daughter, and the wife of that couple died back in 2017. So I was a widow and my friend Keith was a widower. And in 2020, I won't go into the story now, but God really brought us together, and we got married during lockdown, had a very small lockdown wedding. And so we are now husband and wife with 3 disabled daughters between us. So we have 5 children, but 3 of them are disabled. And Keith's daughter has very profound and complex multiple disabilities.
Wow. Wow. So what are their ages? I know you say they're adults.
Okay, so the 2, my eldest daughter and Keith's daughter are only a month apart. They're 41, and my middle daughter is 39.
Wow. 139.
Mm.
See, so I'm really, really right to say that I'm a young carer where this is concerned. So how have you managed, if we come straight down to health, right? We come to the health aspect of it. The statistics are just not smiling. It says we have about 8 million people who have who have been providing, care, who, in the UK, that is, and who have said, this is statistics from the Carer'S UK, who have said that they have seen their health and well-being suffer. How have you managed your own health in all these years with 3 children, well, adults now, disabilities?
Certainly when they were young, it was very difficult. My middle daughter, when she came home from hospital, she took 2.5 hours to feed, which had to be done 6 times a day. So that was 15 hours out of every 24, just trying to feed her. And I had a toddler to look after as well. And then she would also stop breathing 6 or 8 times in every 24 hours, and I would have to start her breathing again. And so that was very difficult. We were up probably 8 or 10 times a night with her throughout her entire growing years. It wasn't until I slipped a disc in my neck lifting her out of the bath that we were given any kind of mobility aids at home to help with her, a hoist or a stair lift or anything like that. In fact, the stair lift we didn't even get provided. We had to buy that ourselves. We were not in a position to do so, and some people at our church offered us the money to buy a stair lift, which was amazing. And then just at the moment when we were going to order it, my mother-in-law died and left an inheritance which enabled us to buy it. So we didn't have to avail ourselves of the help we were offered at church, but it was just amazing that we were offered that help. And I have to say, my church features a lot in my story, because all those years when Ellen, my daughter's name is Ellen, when she was a tiny and desperately ill baby and every fight was a day to keep her alive, what my church did was they got up a rota so that I had someone around every morning and every afternoon, just cleaning my house, doing my ironing, cooking me a dinner. Without that, I just don't know how I would have survived. And I'm very, very well aware of how blessed I was, and that most people don't have that kind of a supportive church. But that was great. I do remember one day that was absolute rock bottom, when Ellen was about 5 months, no, a bit less than that, about 4 months old. She'd been home for a month or so because she had 3 months in hospital. And I was completely exhausted. And my mother said to me, why don't you come and stay with us just for a few days? We'll help you look after the girls. We'll give you a complete break. You can catch up on some sleep. And so I did that. And my husband got off the train on his way home from work every night and came and had dinner with us, and then got back on the train and went home to our house while I stayed with my parents. And while I was with them, I read a magazine article from someone who I actually had known in the past. And I knew that he had a disabled daughter and a very ill wife, and he had been through a very difficult time. And in this magazine article, he talked about, he quoted from Psalm 66, which had the words, For you, O Lord, have laid burdens on our backs. You let men ride over our heads. We went through fire and water. But then it says, but you have brought us out to a place of abundance. And in this magazine article, he talked about all the things he'd been through and how tough it had been, but that through it all, he had come into a place of such a relationship with God that actually he wouldn't have missed it. And he was glad for everything that he had been through. And I read that article and I went back home after that few days of staying at my parents', and I prayed what was perhaps the first really sincere prayer I had ever prayed. And that was, God, I don't care what it takes or what I have to go through, just get me to that place of abundance. And he did that, and I won't tell the whole story because it will take too long, but he just brought me into such a place of relationship with him. But the amazing thing was that I had one day where it had kind of been building up, and looking back, I think I clearly had postnatal depression, which hadn't been diagnosed. And I'd had the health visit around, and my daughter was 5 months old and she weighed 4 pounds 14. And the health visitor said to me, you're not trying hard enough. You've got to do better than this. And, you know, I was, as I say, I was spending 16 hours a day feeding her. I was trying to keep her breathing, and I was up all night, every night. And I just thought, what more can I do? And I was so low that I thought, actually, if I just put a pillow over her face and smothered her, the doctors would think that she had stopped breathing and I hadn't got there in time, because that's what they told me was very likely to happen. I could do this. We could just forget all of this. We could have another baby. You know, we could just put all this behind us. And that's how desperate I was. That's how low I was. And I actually turned to go upstairs in search of a pillow. And there was a knock at my door. So I turned back and went and answered the door. And it was a lady from my church standing on the doorstep. And she said to me, I'm sorry to just call around like this. And she looked a bit embarrassed and she said, but I just had this feeling that God was telling me that you were in trouble and that I should come round here. And I just broke down and told her what was going on. And she put the children and me in her car and took us home. She put me to bed so I could get asleep. She looked after the children. But that moment told me that, you see, I'd grown up, my parents were worked with a missionary society, and I had grown up believing that God so loved the world that my dad had to go all over the place preaching the gospel. But the idea that God's love was for me had never really kind of penetrated. And in that moment, I realized that God, number one, he knew what I was about to do. And number two, he cared enough to stop me. And it was just a revelation of God's love to me that I had never really seen before. And everything was different from then on. So yeah, there were difficulties. There were difficulties. I mean, I had this slip disc, which has given me lifelong problems ever since. It's never been right. And yes, the exhaustion, you know, the problems didn't go away, but somehow I had an inner strength to deal with them that I hadn't had before.
And that's so powerful what you just shared there, because it's that vulnerability when we're in that space is so challenging to, you know, at times even share with anybody, because you just feel like nobody will understand. And that was you, even with all the support system that you kind of had around you at that time, still feeling that way. So how can somebody, you know, a parent carer who might be listening to us today, and they don't even have, they feel so isolated, because part of the things that was, you know, said in the statistics again is the fact that, or that is also known, is that isolation that parent carers feel most of the time, you know, unable to take breaks from caring, no support system around them and all those things. And this is what's impact on their health. I mean, you were talking about the fact that you were, with all the care that you were giving to your daughter, the health worker was still asking you and was still telling you that you were not doing enough. I mean, not even looking after yourself, that is not even part of the question at all.
No, I mean, I'm aware how very blessed I was with the church that I had around me. And I think that, you know, the services that were available to me then, an awful lot of them are not even available now. I mean, we had a home help provided by the local authority for a couple of hours a week who did some housework. I don't think that things like that are even available now. The funding has been cut so much. And so I think I have two things to say. One is to just really look to God for that strength, because my story proves that he can give it. But the other thing I would say is I would just appeal to churches. Have a look around. Who in your congregation is really struggling and needs that support, and how can you organize that support for them?
Indeed, you have actually crossed into so many other, you know, some other things that I had listed here as part of the questions, because you know we have cross audience on this platform where you're talking about, you know, we're in the UK and we know some of this statutory support are available, and I want to come back there, but we also have the audience that it's probably the community that they can leverage on. So, and that's what you're probably bringing out here in terms of what the church is. How powerful is that, or what our faith organizations can do? How can that be a support to parent carers, especially when it relates to their health needs?
Once my girls were older and were all at school, once my youngest had started school, I just wanted to give back some of what had been given to me. And so with the help of my church and with the support of my pastors, I set up an organization that would support families with seriously ill newborn babies. And what I'd learned from my own experience and what I found from talking to other mothers was that when your baby's been in hospital for a long time and comes home with lots of problems, you don't want someone to come in and look after the baby for you, because, you know, she's been in hospital, the nurses have been looking after her. You want to be able to do that yourself. But all the other things get in the way. You've got the ironing to do, you have to cook a meal for your family every night, you know, the house needs cleaning up, the other child needs looking after. And so the organization that I set up, I had a team of volunteers from my church, and we would get families referred to us whose babies were in special care or whose babies were disabled in some way or very ill. And my volunteers, I would go and speak to the mum, I would work out what help she needed, and then my volunteers would just go in and do whatever practical things, giving lifts, doing shopping, taking the laundry away and bringing it back clean and ironed, all those kinds of things, dropping meals round. And that kept running for 17 years. And over the course of the 17 years, we helped over 100 families. And I would just say to churches, you know, I realized that in the UK in particular, I mean, bearing in mind that this was sort of 30, 35 years ago, there were a lot more mums then who didn't go out to work and who had the time to give to doing that kind of thing. And in the UK, we may not be in that situation now, unfortunately, with the cost of rent and the price of property for mortgages and so on. You know, most families, both partners have to work. And so we don't have so many women sitting around with time on their hands. But there are a lot of newly retired women of my kind of age who might have the time to do that kind of thing. And I would just encourage churches to try and mobilize and, you know, find out who in your community needs that kind of support and who in your church can provide that kind of support.
This is so useful, because, I mean, one area that I think is still a little bit green, or especially to my audience, you know, across the globe, you know, in Africa and all, is the fact that we still do not have the kind of support that we would love for the disability community coming through from the church. That is beyond praying for families, beyond deliverance, beyond, you know, casting out demons and all those things. And you're talking of practical help, practical support. That is still missing somehow. And again, the flip side of that is, you know, here in the UK, yes, where you have some of that coming through, the stretch in terms of how that can support families from the start, you know, especially when they're still young and still needing that care. That gap is still there. That gap is still there, which leads me straight on to the social care aspect. I think you mentioned that. I think one of the things I've been curious to know, right, is what we have now compared to where you were coming from. It looks, how you've mentioned some of the things that are be different. How much comparisons can we have in terms of social care wise?
Well, I mean, I look back now and we just had the most horrendous battles to get anything that she was supposed to be entitled to. It wasn't until she was 9 years old that we got any overnight respite, which from then on happened one night a week. We had the father and mother of battles to try and get the education provision that she needed. But honestly, you know, I look back on it now and it seems like a golden age compared to what people have now. You know, the respite care is simply not there anymore. It's not just that you have to battle to get it. It's just not there. You know, children are getting chucked out of school and parents are having to home educate, not by choice, but because the schools will not take them. And it just, as hard as it was when mine were young, I just think it's so much harder for parents now because everything has been cut back.
Indeed, it is. So what can parents do in order to navigate the bottlenecks? Because it's really, I mean, one of the tools is the Carer'S assessment that, you know, that you go through and all that, but that is really not even fit for purpose any longer now. You can do all the assessment and put anything in there and nothing comes out of it. So how can parent carers nowadays, how can they navigate this system of go through these bottlenecks?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there is a statutory requirement on local authorities to do a carer's assessment, but there's no statutory requirement on them to implement any of the things that they have assessed you as needing. And, you know, there are private funding bodies that you might be able to tap into, but you have to do a huge amount of research online. And honestly, who's got the time or the energy to do that? I would just really recommend that people make use of the free help in kind of navigating that sort of stuff that is available online. Contact is a brilliant organization for families with disabled children, and you've only got to look at their you've only got to look at their Facebook page, and anybody asks the question, what do I do about this? Somebody from the organization will pop up with an answer. So that is one that I would really recommend. The Additional Needs Alliance again has a Facebook page which is specifically for caring for disabled youngsters, but within the context of church, and it will give advice on what to do and what churches can do to help as well. And the other one, which I have used more than once in the past, is the Disability Law Service, and it's worth looking them up online because they can quite often, if you know that the law says you're entitled to something and you're not getting it, they can often give you the advice and the support that you need to navigate how you get that.
Thank you so much. Now, can I still take you a little bit back to where we do not have this kind of support available? What can the community do? What can groups do? What can, you know, to support families? You know, again, I would imagine that, I mean, some of the experience you would have had professionally, you would have, you know, you would have seen other situations, I know, through the roof, do things in Africa and all that. That's in right. Those kind of settings that, because like I said, we have cross audience on this platform. what can be done. We're saying some things are not, statutorily, they're available, they're not even enough. In a case where we don't have them at all, how can parent carers survive? Because we do have a lot of parent carers in our as well.
The most important thing that the community could do, whether it's the church community or whether it's a social community around the family, the most important thing you can do is go to the family and say, what do you need and how can we help? Because there isn't a one size fits all. And what will work for one, for me, what I wanted was someone to do other things so that I was free to look after my baby. But there may be people who are so exhausted by the demands of their baby that they just want someone to babysit so they can go and sleep. It will be different for each different person. I tell you how that was really illustrated to me, because when my daughter was born, my second daughter, we got all kinds of letters and cards from people expressing sympathy and telling us, they were praying for us and all this kind of thing. We didn't get one single card that said congratulations. I was so upset. We've got a new baby in our family. Doesn't anybody want to congratulate us? So a few years later, when a friend of mine had a very disabled baby, I went out and chose a card for her, and I made sure it was very sensitive wording, but I made sure that it included the word congratulations, because I remembered how I felt when nobody said that to me. And I sent this card to her. And later on, I heard from another friend that she was very offended by cards that said congratulations because she thought it was completely inappropriate. So it just shows there is no one size fits all. Everybody is different. And the only thing you can do really is ask, what do you need? How can we help? And once you've got that information, then you set about seeing, how do we organize and how do we manage to provide that help? And where the help is not forthcoming, let me say this as well. I can remember one school holiday when my daughter by then must have been about 12, I should think, or 11 maybe, and I had the new baby by then as well. And because my middle daughter is autistic, as well as all her other disabilities, one of the things that she really needs is for her routine to stay the same so that life is predictable. And as long as that happens, she copes. Well, in the school summer holidays, of course, routine goes out of the window. You don't have a timetable every day. And she just couldn't cope with that. And I had one summer holiday when she literally screamed from the day she broke up from school to the day she went back. So from the end of July to the beginning of September, she did not stop screaming. And she would get handfuls of the contents of her nappy and smear it into my furniture and my carpets. And I spent the whole time following around with a bottle of disinfectant. And by the time she went back to school, I had a migraine that lasted 10 days. And in the end, the doctor had to give me something that made me sleep for a week. And when I came to, the migraine was gone, and my husband had to look after the children in the meantime. So the following summer, when the school summer holiday was coming up, I was in church one Sunday, and I just had this kind of little nudge. You know how the Holy Spirit sometimes gives you a little nudge, and it sort of said, the school summer holiday is coming up. And I thought, oh, do you have to remind me? I'm trying not to think about it. And I just felt that God said to me, do you want a summer holiday like the one you had last year? No, absolutely not.
No.
So what are you going to do about it? And I just had this kind of prompting from the Holy Spirit. And I just thought, well, I don't know. What am I going to do about it? I can't change anything. And straight away, a verse from the Bible popped into my head, and it was, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And I thought, well, that's all very well, but where do I get the joy of the Lord? I can't just work it up, can I? And immediately another verse popped into my head, and it was the verse that said, in your presence is fullness of joy. And I just felt God was saying, if you want the strength that's going to get through this summer holiday. It will come from my joy. And the way you get that is by spending more time in my presence, because that's where you find fullness of joy. And I just said to God, you have got to be joking. I am on the go from morning till night. I'm up 8 or 10 times every night. Where am I going to find more time to spend in your presence? And it was as if I was talking to a brick wall. It was like God said, well, that's the deal. You spend more time in my presence, you get my joy. You carry on like you are, you have another summer like last year. And I just said to God, okay, well, if I have to get up earlier in the morning to spend time with you before the rest of the day starts, I can't set an alarm and wake everybody else up. So you're going to have to wake me up if that's what you want me to do. And come the summer holiday, every morning I was wide awake at 5 o'clock. So I took to going downstairs and sitting in my chair with my Bible, and it was all a bit awkward to start with. Oh, well, here I am. I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do, but I'm here. I've got my Bible. I'm listening. By the time I'd been doing it for maybe a week or two, honestly, that hour in the morning had become the most important thing in my day. I woke up. I couldn't wait to get out of bed, get down there, just spend that time with God in his presence. And I tell you what, he gave me a joy that gave me a strength that got through that summer holiday without any of the problems of the previous year. And it became a lifelong habit. And I still get up early in the morning, and the first part of my day goes to God. And that's where my strength comes from. And I hope this isn't a trite answer, because, I went through a phase where nearly everybody at church came up to me and said, his grace is sufficient for you. And the next person that said it was going to get my Bible around their earhole, because I just heard enough of it. But actually, I look back now, and there has always been sufficient grace. And a lot of it has come from those early mornings spent with God. So I hope that isn't a trite answer, but it's an honest answer, that in the absence of any other kind of help, that is something that worked for me.
That's so real, because and I think except one actually experiences it, you might find it difficult to understand it. And that is one of the things, because for my journey personally as well, and which is one of the core of what O Consult is doing, is trying to introduce that the element of God, the God factor, into the caring role. I personally own my own my experience to say, for me, that is what I found that would make a difference, that has made a difference for me. And I do know that there are so many reasons and so many factors all around where you might not even want to touch that by a stretch, because you're even battling with, how could God be this loving and allow me to be going and allow my child, to be fair enough, not even about me now, but allow my child to be going through this much pain and all that. And that is something I found very, very sensitive.
Yes.
As real as it is to me, which is what I'm hearing you say, even with adult children. With adults, how do I place it now? Yes, with adult children, they're still children, aren't they? So with adult children, with disabilities, and with all your experience, that is still ringing true. So that disconnect is what I really wish, other parents, carers would also give this a try and give God that space and see if it would not make a difference in their in their caring role.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that for somebody who's never experienced this to come up to you and tritely say, oh, his grace is sufficient, you just think you don't get it. But if it's somebody who's actually lived through it and they say, well, this is what I found God did for me, that's kind of a bit different, isn't it?
Indeed, because that's one of my rounding up questions to you, to say, what impact has your faith had on your caring role? Which is what you have led us into, nicely in terms of the strength that has given to you. And how much, I mean, in terms of the mental health aspect of things, does this work, and how so?
I mean, I did go through times of really difficult mental health. And actually, I've got to be honest and say that my first marriage was to an abusive and not very faithful partner. And so I was dealing with all of that on top. And I remember there came a time, I'd gone back to work by this time. I had trained as a teacher. My girls were sort of older. They were about to embark on adulthood themselves. And the whole marriage fell apart. And I remember one of my colleagues at work, or in fact, it was my head of department at work, coming to me and begging me to go off sick from work. She said, "You're just not well enough to be here. You're not coping with the job." And I just remember being absolutely devastated. But she was right. And I just had to. In fact, I never went back into teaching. God led me into something else, and that was fine. But I just had a period of really bad depression and bad mental health. But that was kind of.
How did you deal with that? How did you deal with that?
I just did what I had been doing, which was I had to give up work because the school said you're not well enough to be here, and so I was at home, and I took to going for a walk every morning and just spending that time with God and being out in the fresh air. And I was living in a town, but it did have a lake nearby with trees around it. And so I would just go for a walk around it once every morning and spend that time with God. And it wasn't an overnight cure. I can't pretend that it was. It probably took me 6 months to get from that rock bottom. But eventually I did get back to a place where I was in a good place and mentally strong again. And I realize it's not that easy. I mean, with my eldest daughter, who is in this state of autistic burnout, I mean, she's been battling terrible mental health for probably several years now, and it never seems to get any better. And you what can you do? You just cry out to God for her, and you give what support you can. But I do think it's really, really important that we don't stigmatize people who are battling their mental health, that we realize it can happen to any of us. I think at any given time, 1 in 4 people in this country has a mental health condition. So, one day it will
as parents, carers, or generally now, the statistics.
Generally, in the general population. And obviously the rate is higher among carers. But
yeah, definitely.
Be kind, because everybody, you're one incident away from being in that place yourself.
Indeed. Wow. What a wealth of experience and counsel that you're giving us here. What would you say to a younger parent carer who maybe they're just receiving a diagnosis, or is still very early days, in their journey? What would you say to them as we're rounding up now?
I think it can vary. I mean, when my daughter was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, she was about 15 months old. And because she'd been so very ill for the first 15 months of her life, I expected her to be behind in her development. I wasn't very surprised when she was. And it came completely as a shock out of the blue to be told that she had this lifelong condition. But for some other people, when they know there is something not right and they can't find out what it is, receiving a diagnosis actually can come as a great relief. So again, it's very different for different people. But my advice would be, once you have that diagnosis, try to find out what you can about it. There's so much information online, but go to reputable sources. Don't go to people who will scaremonger you. But also, try and find out what what organizations there are that support people with that particular disability, and try to, you know, link into whatever support you get from them. My middle daughter was actually 12 before she was diagnosed as autistic, and we had known for a long time that she was, and she was in a very poor school that didn't really meet her needs. And it wasn't until we got her into a good school and they got an educational psychologist involved and came up with the diagnosis of autism that confirmed what we've been saying. And I wrote to the National Autistic Society here in Britain and got some information from them. And they sent me a sheet of information, and it said, your child will not have all of these characteristics. These are some of the characteristics of autism. Your child will not have all of them, but will have some of them. Well, there was a list of 15, and I could tick off 14 of them.
Wow.
You know, that I didn't particularly turn to that organization for help, but you know, there are the scope, which helps with people with cerebral palsy. They were an immense source of help, and in fact, when we were battling the education authorities, they gave us a huge amount of help in winning that battle and getting her into the good school that we eventually got her to. So, you know, these organizations exist to help families who are experiencing these things. And, you know, that there are charities for almost everything these days. There's a brain tumor charity. There are charities for cystic fibrosis and all kinds of other conditions. And they do, in the main, turn out to be very, very supportive. So avail yourself of them, because that's what they're there for. And talk to other parents, if you can, who've been going through the same thing, who are maybe a bit further down the road than you are. You know, if somebody came to me now and said, my daughter's just been diagnosed with cerebral palsy and I've been told I've got to do this physio every day with her, is that really necessary? I can say to them, well, look, this is the difference that physio made to my daughter, so yes, do it. And you know, just finding somebody who's that bit further down the road than you are and can just talk you through some of what will come, that can be really helpful too.
Thank you so much, because and that was one of the things that I wanted us to get from this as well. I think that peer-to-peer support in one way or the other, whether older adult older parent carers, or you know, your colleagues, you know, maybe age-wise, or if you're going on, at least it takes one to know one, if you want to use that word.
Yes.
And that empathy aspect of it, you know, is also something that is also useful to parent carers.
And specifically for people living in the UK, one thing I would say is that there is quite a lot of financial support available from the government, but not everybody knows about it, and you don't always tap into it. And one really useful source of information, not just information, but help in applying as well, is the Citizens Advice. And most towns will have a Citizens Advice Bureau where you can go and get help. But even those who haven't, there is Citizens Advice online where you can get help. And somebody can talk you through what benefits you're entitled to and even help you with the whole process of applying for them. So that's one thing that I've seen at work with my eldest daughter, now that she's become disabled and she's had to start applying for benefits. Citizens Advice have really helped her through that whole process. So I would say to anybody, you know, get in touch with them and they can tell you what help is available to you and how to access it.
And that's so useful, because when we get so sunken into the day-to-day activities and supporting and caring for that child or the children, you don't even getting up, you know, catching your breath at times is even difficult, you know. So knowing that help could be available, you know, I wish, and I really, really wish that, you know, this is something I could refer my you know, other parents to in a place like Africa, to say, oh, you know, go here, but we don't have those kind of support.
No.
And yeah. It's one of the things that are kind of heavy in our hearts in terms of where to get this support. But at least we have, and that's one maybe where we'll be rounding up, we have our religious settings, we have our churches there. What can you say, you know, in addition to some of the things you've mentioned? I know we talked about churches and support and all that, but what can you say to churches? Because that is something we have in our own community that people can go to, you know. So how can you encourage our churches? In what way can they support families apart from just asking, you know, if what can I do? You know, how can they be structured to support families better?
One of the most important things, I think, for churches is for ministers and those who have, you know, a role within the church that can influence other people, is just inform yourself about how the Bible views disability, because a lot of people will hide their disabled child away, they'll feel ashamed, they'll feel stigmatized. But when you look at the Bible, you know, you have Moses, who had a speech impediment. God used him to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. You had those men with leprosy who'd been put out of the city of Samaria, but when the city was under siege, they saved the lives of everyone in that city. You have Mephibosheth, who had a special place in David's heart, despite his disability. You have the Apostle Paul, who said, on one occasion, he said, I write with very large letters when I write in my own hand. On another occasion, he said, when I came to you, you were so sorry about my condition, you would have plucked your own eyes out and given them to me if you could. On another occasion, he didn't recognize the high priest and he accidentally insulted him. So we know that Paul had a vision problem. And all these people with disabilities in the Bible were people who God used incredibly powerfully. And when it came to Jesus praying for, or rather not praying for, but healing disabled people, he never just went up to somebody and said, oh, you've got a problem and I need to fix it, so come here. He never did that. What he did was, maybe somebody's parent came and said, look, my child is suffering, or somebody's relative came and said, my family member is suffering, or somebody came to him themselves and said, Lord, will you heal me? Or maybe sometimes there were occasions when somebody wasn't in a place to express that they wanted healing, but Jesus could see that was in their heart. Like, for example, the demoniac, the Gadarene demoniac who was not in a position to ask for healing, or the woman who was bent double because she was in the synagogue at the time and women were not allowed to speak. So she couldn't just go up to Jesus and say, I know you can heal me, because she wasn't allowed to speak, but he could see what was in her heart. So he never just, you know, picked on somebody and said, there's something wrong with you and I need to fix it. And yet so often in our churches, that's the impression we give. And I think the most important thing that churches can do is to recognize that, as one disabled person said to me, God knit me together in my mother's womb and he doesn't drop stitches. If somebody is made in a way that is different from the rest of us, God has a real purpose for that person's life. And your job is to support them to fulfill their potential, not to tell them they're, you know, they've got a demon or that there's some kind of stigma attached to their condition, but just to see them as someone made in the image of God. And don't forget, Jesus is God and he's in heaven and he's got scars in his hands and scars in his feet and a hole in his side. Those didn't go away when he was ascended. And people who have scars and imperfections are made in the image of God. And so as churches, the thing is to find those people and to say, God, what did you create this person for? And how can I help them to become everything that you created them to be?
Thank you so much. I feel like we're in church. Because one of the, I mean, for all consults, you know, one leg of the organization is talking to parents, carers, you know, just like we're doing, and what are the practical things and all that. And the second leg of all consult is to raise this awareness within the body of Christ, within the faith organizations, to say, you know what, this life needs to be supported. This family needs help and support. And iron sharpens iron. You might think you're just, you're beyond the benevolence, that we're giving, to the support and all that. We also need to give the word of life, because that is what will prop, just like you have said, today to us today now from your own journey, how significant, thinking back to that summer holiday, how the difference, because you were in God's presence, because not that you will sit down and we don't, the situation would not give the opportunity for that. But that consciousness, that awareness, that knowing that I'm not alone here, there is a higher power, and that is sustaining me. Like I say most of the time, I say underneath are the everlasting arms. And that is, that knowing that is supporting us, it just shifts the responsibilities largely, for you, and you are able to get the strength and carry on. And our church, there's no way we will know that if we don't hear it, if we don't, we're not within the space where we could access that kind of information and that kind of knowledge, and that's one of the things that we're trying to do as well in raising awareness. So what you have said is so profound. It's so profound. Thank you so much. Wow, we've almost clocked an hour here, and I could go on and on with you, all the world and the kind of experience that you're bringing on board. Thank you so much. I can only just say, well, we're onwards and upwards. We're still on the journey. And we continue to ask God for that strength and that grace every day. And it's a daily, I think one of the things I'm also learning is that daily affair, is that, trusting on a daily basis. Let's go through the day, and then, another one, the day gone, and another one, and another one, and it's only God's strength that can take us through that. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. You can be sure we're still going to come back.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ros. Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to just round us up with a word of prayer?
Okay, yes.
Especially lift up, some of the things we've talked about, parents, carers, as well as our churches, our faith-based organizations, to just be able to know. At times, I think maybe it's what we don't know, we're afraid of, but if we all come together, I think that might just help a little bit more. So just pray on this platform and trust. Thank you. So pray for us.
Okay. Heavenly Father, you know that each one of us is carrying great responsibilities that can sometimes be burdensome, and heartaches when we see what our children are going through as well. And I just pray that for those things that are so visible to other people, that you will prompt people to come alongside, to share the burden, to help, and to carry things that are too much for us to manage on our own. But at the same time, Father, you know that each one of us is carrying things that nobody else can see and that only you know about. Feelings, memories, heartaches, all kinds of things that nobody else sees and that we keep to ourselves. And I just remember the words of the great man of God, Samuel Rutherford, who lived in the 17th century, when he saw somebody going through a terrible time like this, and he said to her, Christ walks with you and shoulders your burden and puts your shoulder beneath only a part of it. And I just pray that people will have that experience of you walking alongside them, shouldering that burden that nobody else sees and carrying it with them. And Lord, for those of us who are parents of disabled children, you also know that people look at us and think, oh, those poor things, what a terrible time they're having. And they actually miss the great joys that we have as well. We parents of disabled children, we experience depths that we wouldn't wish on our worst enemies, but we also experience incredible heights of joy when our child achieves something that we've been told they'll never manage, and all kinds of things like that. When we see the love between our able children caring for our disabled children, the joy that can bring to our hearts. I just feel that as parents of disabled children, we live life to the full because we go to both extremes. And Father, you see all of that and you share it with us. And I just pray for everyone watching this podcast that your presence and your life and your sustaining joy will be a very real and present reality in their life, just carrying them through. And Lord, I do believe that whatever life throws at us, you are greater. And I just pray that everyone listening to this will just cast themselves on you and find how wonderful you are at sustaining even in the most difficult of times. In the name of Jesus, we ask it. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Ros. Thank you so much. We have been blessed on this, and I assure you, I mean, if I have questions, usually when we finish interviewing like this, some people send in questions and all that. I will just be forwarding them to you just in case if I have anyone.
Okay.
I'm sure there might be some that might be beyond my own depth. Based on, I've just had 13 years of caring. So, like I said, I will qualify just as a young carer.
Yes.
So, thank you. God bless you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. God bless.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. God bless.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. God bless you.
Bye.